Welcome to Becoming. We are grateful to have you in our audience this morning. Our guest on today's show is Joel Graber, and he is the founder of Modern Outbound. They are a turnkey outbound team that generates pipeline with the right mix of technology and systems and the human experience. So, Joel, welcome to the show.
Yes.
We're glad to have you.
Very excited to be here. Excited to chat with you guys.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Yeah, it's like lead generation is like everywhere we look, there's like more and more lead generation, like people reaching out to me in DMs and LinkedIn. It's like really like the crazy scene in terms of the strategies involved. So I'm super excited for the conversation as well.
Yeah, me too. It's what you would call a red ocean. And there are a lot of good players out there, not so good players. So we'll dive into all that.
Great.
Super excited.
Now, I mean, we don't even need to explain why what you're offering is so critical, because any organization, any salesperson, this is the thing they dislike the most, right? And how do you get it targeted, and what is the right content, and is your list clean, so to say, or are they old emails and that's why you're not getting a response? So there's so many reasons why you're needed, and there's so many people that don't do it well. And we wanted to have you on the show because it's one of the things we like to do is kind of vet out different companies so that our listeners don't have to do that work. So you are here because of that. So why don't we start with, tell us a little bit about why you started the company.
So I started the company. I've always been in sales, and I did it because I knew that the top of the funnel, outbound lead generation, was where there was the most innovation happening. I think all of the consulting that happens around sales, how to close a deal, how to build a relationship, I feel like that stuff doesn't really change. Like, be a good listener, ask good questions, nurture the relationship, solve a problem. But the way in which you actually get in front of those opportunities is changing so rapidly. So I came from a world, I came from the Wall Street finance world, JP Morgan, I was at BlackRock for a while, institutional sales. We had shackles on what we could do and not do on cold email, LinkedIn. I don't know, it wasn't really a thing. It was more of like a recruiting platform back then. But we couldn't really be creative. People had heard of like JP Morgan, BlackRock, these are big brands. So I didn't really work that muscle as hard, but towards the end, bigger opportunity, our markets got bigger, and we needed to get in front of these people. And I left because I felt like, well, there were a lot of reasons why I left, but I wanted to be more creative on the growth side of things. And I felt like there was only so much I could do there. So I joined a startup where I was a director of partnerships, a company called Facet Wealth. And that was kind of like a lab for me. That was where I was really testing all these different outbound strategies. Nobody had heard of Facet Wealth. Now they're $1 billion company. But at the time, very early stage, how do we get the word out? They had done outbound before I got there. That was an absolute disaster. I mean, these emails were horrific, untargeted. Their domains were blasted in spam. So we had to kind of work uphill a little bit. And then I realized, I was getting more meetings for myself. I was closing a lot of deals, and I was getting more meetings for myself than a lot of the sales development reps were getting for me. So I was like, you know what? Probably a lot of startups that need help with this. It's a little more complicated than it was 10 years ago. So look, I should do something about it. That was how Modern Outbound was born about 3 years ago.
It's great. It's a great story. And I love when the story begins with people actually doing the job and realizing what's missing. We talk about this all the time, that, you don't have to always be in the position, but you have to be in the position to really understand the system of it, the faults of it, and where it needs to be tweaked to be more effective and efficient. And if you haven't done it, you can read all you want about it, but you have to do it. So it also builds trust. I know it does for us, that you've actually done it, you've seen what works, you've seen what doesn't. How should a business start approaching their lead generation, in your opinion?
I'm going to say something controversial to your point.
Oh, we like that.
The SDR role, the BDR, business development rep, whatever you want to call it, is no longer an entry-level position. And I think for many, many years, it's an entry-level job. Like 25, 30 years ago, if you wanted to get leads, you'd hire a 22-year-old kid. Here's a phone book, or here's like a list that we bought from something. Like, make some calls, make it happen. There wasn't any infrastructure. We didn't have to worry about landing in spam. or if data was clean or not clean. We didn't have any automations. And I think it was easier. People were less saturated back then. So there's kind of like two parts to it. These days, the biggest mistake I'm seeing companies make, and it's not just startups, it's well established post Series B, C, or even companies that are not even in the startup stage. They bring on entry-level SDRs that don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to set up domains the right way. They're certainly not using the right tool stack that's going to help them scale lead generation. And even more so, they don't know how to write copy, which I would say copywriting is the core skill I think that any SDR should have. And how can you expect a kid in their 20s to figure out how to write copy without any experience? Because like you said, Lisa, you kind of learn by doing, but if they haven't done it, they're a year out of college. They've written essays, which is actually the opposite of what you should do. The stuff you write in the classroom, like your English teacher should hate your copy. And if they like it, then you're doing something wrong. This is what these college kids know how to do. And you see it. You see the inboxes. It's a disaster.
So interesting. So why don't we just parlay off of that? What should the content look like?
So,
and why should your English teacher hate it?
Yeah. So good questions. I would say high level, it should always be conversational. I used to get dinged in English class. I remember high school, college, like stop writing like you speak. There was like a certain like structure. You had to speak in this kind of formal tone. The grammar had to be perfect. You couldn't like bring like hyphenate or bring words together. Putting commas and slashes in weird places was very frowned upon. So that ended up being one of the strengths of like modern outbound copy, was that we write like we speak. We're conversational, because when you're reaching out to somebody cold, the number one thing you want to do is build trust. And if you have this like formal 5-paragraph deal, if it's generic, it's generic. Like they're not going to think it's for them, so they're not going to engage. But if it's not conversational and it's not quick, where they're actually reading it, scanning it, you get about 8 seconds of their time, you haven't built trust and you haven't made your case fast enough. So be conversational, 25 to 50 words in an email, lead with a new problem in every step of the sequence. Maybe make it 5 to 7 steps. We can talk about the other mistake that sales managers make, is do some crazy 18-step sequence, big mistake. But to answer your question on like English teacher stuff, it should be, the grammar can be a little bit off. Think about how you text your friends. Your reply rate to your friends is probably 100%. And a lot of that stuff isn't grammatically correct. It's probably really quick, to the point. So those are the principles we use when we write copy.
And how do you look at the trade-off of, because I agree with you, I would look at something like that too, but where's the trade-off of, ooh, that wasn't professional? Where you want it to be professional and not so stoic and uptight. Is there a line you can talk about?
There is a line, and I think, and it's a really good point, because a lot of it depends on who you're reaching out to. Are you reaching out to a CIO or a chief information security officer or an IT director or even a CTO? Because maybe that copy is going to be a little different to the head of marketing or the VP of sales, where they see even more outreach and they're probably a little bit more outgoing, extroverted, open to that kind of language. But I would say, I don't care who you're reaching out to. I don't care who the role is. It can be conversational and professional. Those two aren't mutually exclusive. You don't always be respectful. Make it about them. But if they're a CISO versus like an HR leader, like, yeah, maybe you turn it up or turn it down depending on who you're talking to. But I find we send over 1 million emails a month across our client base. So the data we see is so obvious that the more conversational, the more pithy, concise, you're just going to get more engagement. Because ultimately, cold outreach is about getting engagement. It's not selling a product.
That's right.
It's about getting the person to respond to something. Call to action is really call to engagement.
Yeah, I think that the big point for like me looking at that and hearing that is just thinking about LinkedIn on my own approach of the people that are flooding my LinkedIn inbox every single day. There's so many messages, and just like which ones are catching my attention and which ones do I actually like. And I think the big key there is which ones don't seem like the person is deliberately trying to sell me something. Because like some of them are so like, all right, this person's gonna sell me something. Some of them, as you were saying earlier, are just flat out just the weirdest messages I've ever received of like, very unprofessional, but like doesn't even make grammatical sense. So I'm just like, it's like, I do insert whatever they do. I do podcast management, or I do email. I'm like, okay, like that's nice, man. Cool. Okay.
Good homework.
It sounds great.
Right.
It's so cringy out there.
Yeah, it's nothing surprises me from emails to LinkedIn to DMs. It's like it's crazy. In terms of copywriting, like I'm a huge copywriting nerd. Like I like to read Gary Halbert, somebody that I read a lot about, and I learned a lot of great stuff from. Are there any people that come to mind when it comes to copywriting that you've learned from, or you really appreciate their work?
Ooh, that's a great question. So on LinkedIn, there are a lot of people that I follow who do a lot of like ghostwriting on LinkedIn. And I think the principles that they share are accurate, like are evergreen. Guys like Josh Braun, who's someone that you guys might know, he shares a lot of things. Jason Bay is another great influencer on LinkedIn who works with a lot of reps, has seen a lot of sequences, like best practices. Guys like Matt Barker, who's becoming like a top voice on LinkedIn with ghostwriting. Like he focuses a lot on like posting content, but I follow him because a lot of his stuff is just great for cold email too. It kind of translates. You want to follow good copywriters on LinkedIn because they share good nuggets.
So you talked about like there, kind of touched upon it, but the whole conversation between inbound marketing and outbound marketing. Maybe you're biased when it comes to that with the name of the company, but I'm always curious to see what is your thought process when it comes to inbound versus outbound marketing.
I think it's an ecosystem. I think the mistake a company would make is to pick a lane and just stay in one lane. Lead generation, what we do, outbound. So outbound and lead generation I'm using interchangeably, is the fastest way to not only get leads and start conversations, but it's the fastest way to get feedback. So for a lot of companies we work with that are earlier stage startups, they raised a seed round, they're still figuring out their identity, although they know who they serve. It's when you build outbound sequences, and we are pretty active, we'll build 20, 25, 30 audiences, all different personas, all different messaging. After a couple months, you can figure out like what's resonating with who. Okay, like problem A isn't working with persona A as well as we thought, but problem B in that follow-up is getting a way higher reply rate. Why don't we lead with that next time? So you're saying following copywriters and things like that, it's good to follow people, but answering your earlier question, it's even better to just try things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think me and Lisa were talking about this earlier today and the other day, but Gary V, of course, everybody probably knows who Gary V is, but he always says, I didn't really notice he was saying this. Like it didn't really like, click for me that until like a recent video, but he always says, don't listen to what I'm saying, watch what I'm doing. And I think that like hits right upon the nail. It's like you can watch Gary V videos all day long, or you could just go to Gary V's socials, his company, the brands he works with, and see what they're doing for marketing, content, and get a lot of an approach. So it was really cool that you hit that same kind of topic there.
Where a lot of us are just passengers and we're like absorbing content, listening to things, reading posts, but very few actually go out and experiment and test 7 different variations to the same audience to figure out what's working, because you'll learn way more from that. But to answer your question about lead generation versus inbound, outbound versus inbound, I think it works really well in this ecosystem where you're doing cold outreach, because cold outreach is a brand awareness play. This is the other thing that gets missed is like, yes, you're trying to get leads, you're trying to get meetings, of course, but what about all the people that mentally respond to your email? They don't physically type anything, but they're like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'm not in the buying window, but maybe in 6 months I will be. There's an inbound component to that. They'll go to your website, right? Maybe they'll make a mental note. If you nurture them the right way, you'll get them back online. But there's brand awareness and outbound lead generation. But even better if you're doing inbound strategies. Like if you're posting on LinkedIn every week, every day, you're sharing blog posts that you're then using in your outbound, it just builds more credibility. So the outbound and inbound works well. People that open your outbound emails, so we have a process where when I was running ads on LinkedIn, I would pull a list of people that opened my outbound emails like 10 plus times and didn't respond. And then we would retarget them on LinkedIn ads, and the conversion was fantastic because these were people that they didn't move me to spam. They thought it was interesting enough to open it a bunch of times. They may have shared it internally, but I leveraged my outbound data for ads, which then retargeted them, brought them right back to my site to book a demo. So every sales leader, revenue leader, or founder should be thinking of it as like a kind of like a flywheel. Like they all kind of play into each other.
Right. It's a whole process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And never just stay in one lane.
And it's hitting those people multiple times without being in their face, you know, by you know, you have the outbound, and then there's a little bit more of a soft launch when you see how receptive they were to what you just sent out, because that is so true, Joel, that not everybody is ready to take on whatever product or service that you're selling.
Right.
The point about being consistent and having good content is that you did trigger something in their brain that says, oh, wow, you know what? I don't need this now, but I might need it. Or I like the way that feels. I like their approach. And if you're consistent, then when they are ready or they have the need, you're there.
Exactly. Don't never neglect the brand.
Yeah.
And too many companies will neglect the brand because they have impatient investors and they just need to get more deals over the line. But if you neglect the brand, your outbound will suffer.
Yep.
I think of it this way, like at any given time, let's say you have a big addressable market or small, 3% of your addressable market at any given time is ready to buy. They're in the buying window. You just need to get in front of them. Most outbound that happens today is only geared towards those people, right? It's very here and now. Here's my product, me. Here's all the things we did, the awards we won, the funding. And then maybe you'll get some of those people. It's not that effective. But that's what all the outbound is geared towards. But there's that outer layer of maybe 10% of your addressable market, even 15%, that they're not in the window, but they can be convinced. They can be, if you ask an illuminating question or you poke the bear a little bit, you get them to rethink their process, you might get a conversation. So that's good, right. Outbound should be hitting both of those layers.
Right. Not just hitting that 3%, not hitting that 97%, trying to make them the 3%. Right. Yeah. That's never going to happen.
Right.
If you hit the 3%, that's awesome. But the point should be, you know, nurturing that 97% for when they're eventually in the sweet spot of conversion.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what outbound should be. And unfortunately, it's a little glossed over and overlooked. And we can talk about infrastructure, like how to actually get in inboxes and like the copywriting, but it's all one machine. Like it should all be working together.
Yeah, but let's talk about that because that's important. Talk about the infrastructure.
Yeah. Again, another reason why SDR is not an entry-level position. You cannot expect an entry-level person to build the outbound infrastructure and say, okay, we can send emails from our main domain, which you should never do. I don't care if you're sending 50 cold emails today. Never send it from your main domain. If your sales leader or your founder says, go ahead and do it, don't do it. It's a big mistake. Your day-to-day emails can get trashed. Even if 5 grumpy people move your email to spam on a given day, reputation takes a hit. So important on the infrastructure side. Whenever we onboard clients, we set up multiple domains. If they don't already own them, we'll let it warm up for a while. We'll build subdomains under those. And this is above my head too, by the way. I have a CTO who is an email deliverability god, and he handles this complicated part of onboarding. He works with everybody to configure SPF, DKIM, DMARC authentications, make sure it's hooked up the right way to your outreach software, you know, make sure you're not blacklisted, make sure you warm up your domains, hook up tools like MailReach to increase traffic and get spam reports, use a tool like Glock apps to figure out as you're doing outreach, like, how's my domain doing? A domain is like a person. It has a reputation. And if you're bothering people with bad messages, the reputation takes a hit and people don't trust you. And servers are looking out for that. The servers have gotten much better at it. So building those subdomains, configuring it, authenticating it the right way is everything. If you don't do that right, you could have the best copy, the best target, like a really tight list. They're never going to see it.
How long, to talk a little bit about warming up the domain, do you mean just, testing it out, seeing how it's responding, make sure that you're not being put into spam, and then if it's not working, can you change within that domain, or is that when you go to your next domain and try something new?
So you're hitting on a couple of points there. I would say when you're warming up, we do pretty high volume for our clients. So we probably send 800 to 1,000 emails a day per client across multiple campaigns and steps. It's usually around that, 800 to 1,000, 700 to 900, something like that. From day one, you obviously can't send 700 emails. It'll take 2 hours before you get completely blacklisted. And that domain will be trashed. So we have a manual warm-up process. So day one, 15 emails. Day 2, 30, day 3, 45, 70. Increase the delay. Have a long delay between emails that are going out. Don't send 10 emails in a minute. That's a mistake. Spread it out over the course of the day. Like, have a long sending window. I would say we always have 12-hour sending windows, sometimes like 10 or 11. But if you have a longer sending window, like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., you can do fewer emails per hour, which is better for deliverability. But ramp it up and check your domain religiously every single day for if your campaign is just getting running. How's it going? Like, how a tool like MailReach will tell you how many out of the emails they're sending are being pulled out of spam. Glock apps will tell you after a few weeks, are you ready to go to the next level? Can you start sending 200 a day? Can you start sending 600? Sales teams get pretty impatient with this, and then by the second week, they're sending 600 emails a day. They're not getting replies, which is hurting their domain even more at that level of volume. But if that, to your point, Lisa, like if the domain isn't doing well, 3 months in, you should have a backup domain and do domain rotation. So let it rest, put it to the sideline for a little bit, bring up the backup domain that's been warming up this whole time so that you can get back in the game faster.
I'm curious in terms of the companies either you usually work with, because like what I'm hearing here is like this definitely seems like a process that is complicated. I'm sure there's some automation tools that we can maybe get into later that can help different businesses. Is there like an ideal type of company or business, like what specific product they are selling that should implement certain types of email marketing campaigns with that type of volume?
Yeah, I would say any company that is built to scale. If you're like a one-person consulting shop, this probably wouldn't be right for you. You can only handle that many clients at one time, so you wouldn't be able to handle our lead flow if you're a one-person consultant. But if you're a tech company, a SaaS or software startup, and like you're trying to sell software, this is table stakes. You have to do something like this.
Gotcha.
There are companies, just to show you the other side of the coin, there are companies that say, nah, automated outreach really isn't for us. We want to bring on an SDR and they're going to hyper personalize every email. They're going to do 50 of those a day. I have opinions on that. I don't think that scales. I don't think that's why the great companies became great, but there is that other side of the coin. You could also blend the two. You could say, okay, I'm going to personalize my top 50 accounts, the ones that like I would chop my left arm off to work with. Fine, personalize it, but make it tie into your value prop. The rest should be hyper relevance.
Yeah.
So only do personalization if you've done the work on segmentation. But to your question, everybody should do this. Anybody that's trying to sell anything, unless you have capacity issues.
That makes sense. I think in terms of the personalization thing, I was looking at a LinkedIn post from you earlier, just going down your feed, and I wrote it down as one of the questions because I heard, not that you said it in a very articulate, great way, but I was like, there's some emotion behind this. He has a firm opinion when it comes to like personalized emails. Do you want to touch like a little bit more in terms of what we mean by personalized emails versus the other alternative to that?
I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah, did it feel like a rant a little bit? I apologize. No, sometimes, once a week I'll go on a little rant. But there's different types of personalization. And there are types of personalization that is great, but it should be able to be scaled, right? So, for instance, like good personalization at scale, if you want to use that term, technographic details, like that everybody on this list uses Salesforce. Or for let's say your product integrates with Salesforce. It's a native integration. It's a great story. Pull a list of Salesforce users. To me, that's hyper relevance at scale. Some might call that personalization. So that's a great way to build outbound. But what I see sales reps do, and they do it to me too, I see it in my inbox. The first line is totally unrelated to how they can help me. It's just kind of like patting my ego. Like I've seen a few, like, hey, noticed you volunteered at this organization. Like, so cool. Like, great work. By the way, we do X, Y, Z. Like, come on. Like, I know you spent a couple seconds on that, which I guess I appreciate. And maybe I'll even respond because of like law of reciprocity. Like, I feel like I have to, like, you put in time. It doesn't make me want to buy your product anymore. So those like random one-liners that sales managers just love, maybe because it makes them feel like you're more in control of the situation. Like, okay, if we personalize all of these emails, like, we'll get a higher reply rate and we can do this. We can put in the time every day to do it. It doesn't help.
It doesn't.
Work smart over work hard.
I think
you
it makes
see it a
them-
lot. Yeah.
I think it makes them feel better about what they're doing. Oh, we're supposed to personalize, so let's personalize. I get
Right.
an email like that, and I'm like, oh my God, if they're saying this in an email, I'm going to be on the phone with them forever. They're going to try and be connecting with me with things that don't matter, and oh my God, I'll never get that 15 minutes back.
Yeah,
It's like the curse of sales, though. At the same time, it's like we get this, like which is the weirdest thing. Like when I was younger and before I got into sales, and I didn't really understand this whole world of like the marketing, sales, and everything that's involved in this and the outreach that people can do. But now that you get to learn the back end and see the sales techniques, the email marketing techniques, it's like you can't fool a salesperson. It's like I can obviously tell you're coming to my inbox saying like, "Hey, Kosta, find one way to connect with me," and then like, "I love your post on whatever, great post." Then something random. It's like, do you not think I know that like you're specifically just doing that to then ask me another question, which is fine. It's like, how do you do it in a great way? That's what I'm going to ask at the end here. But like, it's like a difficult process.
Right.
Yeah. If there's a motive there, it doesn't feel quite as good. It's like I had in another post that I think about a lot. Like, are you the vitamin or the painkiller? You know, like the vitamin solutions need to personalize. The painkillers don't. It's like, I have something you need. Like, I'm going to cut to the chase and build trust that way.
I love
It's funny that you mentioned that.
Great analogy.
I'm looking at a book right now by Alex Hormozi, $100 Million Offers, and he talks about like the difference between, I think he was talking about some sort of anxiety medication. I forget what the exact one, versus like somebody using like a meditation app or a meditation coach, and it was like the pain of like doing it. It's like, take the pill and you feel better, versus like open the app each day, go through a session every day each week, then 3rd month, 4th month, 5 months, you'll probably feel better. Or take the pill, it's done, and you feel better. And it's tough.
It's tough. And in that context, I'm big on meditation and like putting in the time to do that, but it just doesn't translate as well into like an outbound strategy. Like,
Right.
It's got to be like
there is
here
no
and now.
silver bullet, but being direct in a sales approach, I would rather hear that. I would rather hear, do you have 5 minutes? I took a look at your business and I think I have some things that could work. If I don't, not a big deal. And then bullet, what you can do.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of bullets, just not to, but
No,
not
I'm
a fan
open
of
to
bullets. Never do bullets in an email, FYI.
What would
People
you
will
do?
gloss over at that.
What would be an effective way to make an impact on someone without doing the fake bonding?
Find a reason why they would care about your solution. And a lot of times I find it's role specific. So if you really know the role, like what does this, if it's a product for a CFO, like if let's say it's a lending platform that's being sold to finance leaders, right? Which happens to be one of our clients. What do they go home complaining about? What are their motivations? They want to get, if they're a CFO, they don't really care about promotions, but they want bigger headcount. They want to grow their team. They want the company to look good on the balance sheet. Like, how do we help them do that? Maybe they want to fund growth. Like, focus on those motivations, and it should only be focused on that. Mm-hmm. And if you can lead with, they might be motivated by 5 things, but don't make them work hard. Like, just lead with one thing. Like, hey, I know, go vertical, industry specific, that role that's specific. So a CFO, like in the trucking space, like, hey, you guys might want to fund growth to buy more trucks. I'm keeping it very simple. Buy more trucks next year. you're probably relying on just a handful of lending relationships, right? And then you get into like, what if you had the option to get better terms, a bigger pool of lenders? Like, have you ever explored that? Call to action, like keep it soft. Just start the conversation. But don't list too many things. It overwhelms them. A lot of software does a lot of things, usually. But the mistake, and it happens on inbound too, not just lead generation, is you want to get it all out there.
Right.
There's like this OCD and like, I need to tell you everything so that you can just pick it off like it's a Chinese menu. Like you can just pick off the thing, but it doesn't work that way because like you're not hungry. You're not at a restaurant. Like you're not hungry.
Right.
So you're giving someone a menu of all these options and they're not ready to eat. So just give them one thing and test it. Do 4 or 5 tests where you're leading with 4 different problems in the same message to the same people so that after a month you're like, okay, the reply rate on problem C is 7% and the reply rate on problem A, which I thought was way better, is like less than 1%. Okay. There's your answer. You know?
That's great.
What are some good CTAs then to have at the bottom of those messages?
I would say really soft, like I like yes or no. Like we used to do like more open-ended calls to action and we tested on different personas. But even things like want to learn more, worth exploring, mind if I share a quick sample video or something where like they could just say, yeah, send it. Mind if I send a quick piece or PDF or video does really, really well. Because they feel like they're not being sold to, like you're going to send me more. But I'll say the caveat there is it requires the salesperson to do a little more hand-to-hand combat. Right. The laziness happens where you're like, do you have 30 minutes next Tuesday? And everyone wants to do that because it's so easy. Like the person says, yeah, 30 minutes next week, but it's never that simple. And too many people are doing that where it doesn't work anymore. So to do outbound the right way, you've got to like have some follow-up ready if you want to get them to start talking. To what we were saying earlier, like that bigger market that's not in the buying window. If you say 30 minutes next week, they're not going to want to talk to you.
Right.
Even someone in the buying window might not be wanting to talk to you yet. So you want to get your reply rates up. I'm a deliverability guy, like through and through, because we're doing the volume we're doing, and you want to get more replies.
Yeah.
You know, replies beget replies.
Yeah, I'm interested in terms of like, I feel like I could be wrong, but the separate world between like a software tech company that's selling software versus, let's say, a service-based business like an agency that is selling some sort of service. Like, what are some like differentiators that, let's say, like, I feel like most people that probably listen to this are generally on the service-based agency type of side or something like that versus like working for a tech company. It could be a mix, but my world, more curious at the same time, what are some things that agency businesses can use in terms of their outbound process?
It's such a good question. I was just talking about this with a client that we're onboarding. They do software development, product developers. They're like staffing in that way. And they asked this very question. I don't think that it's a totally different strategy, but your expectations should be a little bit different. I find that when you're selling software, you can hit on like the aspirational things. Like you'll get people out of the buying window because it's not as big of a deal for them to buy some software, sign up for a trial, maybe buy it for a few months. When you're a higher ticket service, you may get fewer leads each month relative. Like we have service businesses that we work with and we have SaaS, like software. And I would say 8 or 9 out of 10 times software gets more leads. It just does. It hooks people faster because if you're going to buy like outbound or marketing services or outsource CFO services, like you really kind of need it. Like if you're going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars a month, like you really need to have your hair on fire, or in the next 2 months, like you need a solution for it. So I would say for the people listening who have an agency or a service, it's critical to be like a domain expert. If you don't come off as a domain expert, it's probably not going to land as well. So sharing ideas, asking really good questions that shows you like know your space really, really well. Like that's less critical when you're selling SaaS to be a domain expert. It's more of like, we really know like the benefits of what our product can do. Like we know what your role is. We know how this can help you. Great. They're not necessarily really going to care if the person reaching out is like an expert in their industry. But when you're a marketing agency or a CFO or HR or accountant or whatever, you better be an expert, and it needs to shine through in your outbound. Otherwise, it won't land.
Gotcha. So what I heard there is like what clicked for me is the insight and the tip sharing. So I immediately hear coming from a place of value versus in a place of taking away something. So like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe an email, if you probably have some great examples, but like what clicked for me is like, you recognize somebody that's in whatever agency that could be in need of some marketing services, maybe offer something that could help them that you guys do. If it's a web design, hey, here's like a web design guide that audit that you can do for your own website to see whether or not like it's optimized for XYZ. But what are some like specifics of that?
Something like that could be good using but it has to be very, very quick. You don't want to include like long webinars or guides, but if you have like a 1-minute video, or even like taking a podcast that you did and repurposing it into a 1-minute video, hey, I had a conversation with another founder of an agency and we talked about this. Does any of that resonate? Because a couple of my takeaways were X. That's good. In some of my outreach, I'm just looking here, like I'm looking at some examples of like my own, because I'm an agency. So in this particular one that I just randomly pulled up, I'm reaching out to fintech startups, and I happen to work with a lot of great fintechs. So I'm using a lot of like social proof in this email, and I'm kind of saying like, hey, I work with, I won't say it on the podcast, but XYZ companies, which are fairly well known. They were having issues with X, and here I'm talking about deliverability. Like their sales team was growing and they were having problems with landing in spam. Turns out their authentication was way off and their data was dirty. So we helped them do X. Are you guys running up against this right now? Those aren't the exact words, but that's the essence of what I'm trying to say. So I'm not including like any guides or anything like super like long and boring that they're not going to click on. But through that text only email, I'm like kind of teaching them something without like teaching them something.
Yeah.
Because then they say to themselves, oh shit, like I don't, our salespeople are sending from the main domain. I'm like way off on this. Yep. So, and then I'm A/B testing that versus like, hey, we work with other fintechs that sell to other banks and institutions, and there are even tighter firewalls and servers for those banks. So like, how are you getting in inboxes? And I have another one that talks about copywriting. So right now I have, for that fintech startup sequence, there's like 4 variations. 2 of them are deliverability. The other 2 are in copywriting. And I'm kind of giving them like quick tips. I do a quick bump just to get them to read the first one. Mm-hmm. Don't give like a whole other spiel on the second email if they haven't read the first one. Just remind them of the first one, but that first one better be good. But then my third one is I move on to something else. For deliverability, if they're not responding to that, by the third message, I'm talking about something else.
Gotcha.
And in this case, I'm talking about like persona batching. Like, it looks like you probably have a pretty big addressable market. Like, how are you batching these prospects together that have something in common? Right.
That makes sense. So say if a company needed to, I don't know, improve their outbound strategy, incorporate with what you're saying, how should they go about it? Is there something they should hire, and how should they outsource it? What is the best way to approach that?
I would say, I'm going to be biased on this answer.
I know. I knew it.
I would say this. It depends on what stage the company is at, I suppose. I recognize and respect that sometimes like a CRO or a VP of sales at a big company with a big sales team that needs to be fully in-house. So just if you're a really big company with lots of reps, like sometimes we come in to like build the infrastructure and like implement a process that their salespeople can replicate, which is one way to do it. So you can it's a good idea sometimes to bring in experts to like who do this all day long to help you really maximize. If you're an earlier stage startup, I'm just not a fan of hiring SDRs. I have rarely seen it work out, especially for the startups that get a bunch of funding and they go on a hiring spree and they bring on like 6 or 7 SDRs that are untrained. They get an outdated playbook and it's a disaster like 2 or 3 months into the game. The churn on an SDR is 10 months. So you put in all this hiring and training only for them to walk and take what they learned to another company. And agencies might do it a little bit differently. But I would say some of your first hires should be like a full cycle rep that is going to close deals, but also might be involved in like their own like light prospecting. But bring in an expert. It doesn't even have to be us, although I think we're pretty good.
I think you're pretty
Yeah,
good.
well, definitely have to agree with that. And I kind of want to shift over to we talked about before we even started the show, but the whole agency side of things and being an agency owner. I'm curious, and this is kind of flipping the script, but where do most of the leads come from for Modern Outbound? How do you generate leads for your company?
So earlier days, it was almost all outbound. Now, we have a pretty nice sized client base. So it's probably 50-50 on outbound, 50% referrals. But I still do a lot of, I consider my outbound instance like a lab. I'm testing a lot of things that we then could apply to other clients. So at this point, I would say probably 50-50, depending on the month. Sometimes it might be more outbound leads. Sometimes it might be more referrals. And I've been doing more content on LinkedIn, so I've been sharing more there, which is starting to generate some leads. And that helps with my outbound too. Because my sign off on some of these sequences for outbound is hey, I share stuff on LinkedIn about outbound. Would you want to connect? And I get a lot of replies from people that say, yeah, would love to connect and hear what you're doing. And some of them are even starting to engage on posts. So what we talked about with the buying window, they thought the email was interesting, but they don't need it right now. But I'll be top of mind when they are.
That's a great point. I think I found you because I think it was you commented on somebody else's post or the algorithm favored your content, but I saw one of your posts and I was like, I love this, and connected, and then saw more and more posts and was like, wow, this person knows what he's talking about. I'm getting a ton of value, and that led to having the conversation. Well, it's true because it's people get confused of what to do, and it's they think, oh, should I post content? I think content's a huge topic nowadays too, and I'm curious to see your thoughts on where does content come into the marketing strategies for either your business and businesses in general. But I think the power of LinkedIn with organic content is important. What are your thoughts on that?
Huge. I mean, if you're you were asking a second ago about agencies, if you're a B2B agency, you are missing out if you're not posting on LinkedIn and sharing and engaging with other people that have audiences you can tap into. There's 800, don't quote me on this, but I think there's 800 million people on LinkedIn. And I think a couple of my friends who are way better at posting than I am tell me that 2 to 3% are actually posting. So I don't think it's always going to be that way. But for these next few years, it is such a huge opportunity to get in front of so many people organically. Yeah. And it compounds. So don't spend $20,000 a month on ads if you haven't nailed organic content yet. No. Like what you guys are doing, podcasting, blogs, sharing ideas, engaging with other people's content. I mean, I'll post something and I'll get, 15,000 impressions. And it's free. It's just something that I wrote down and posted it, and now a lot of people see it. So if you're an agency, do outbound, because if you have a really good, clear ICP, who you help the most, get after it on outbound, but definitely LinkedIn content, LinkedIn specifically. And some would say Twitter is a good way. You can use it for both, even shorter form on Twitter. But I think LinkedIn is just is so ripe for more creators.
Totally.
Yeah. I think especially repurposing content, if you do it smart, for example, this podcast, of course we're biased when it comes to the podcast thing, but it's you film one podcast like this. I'm editing the podcast we did the other day here as well, and there's 10 short clips, 5 to 10 little segments of it there with timestamps. So you can post that one video, and then you have 5 to 6 short clips that you can post again, and then you have 10 maybe short clips with captions, and then you can turn all those into blog posts. You can turn them into LinkedIn posts. You can turn them into graphics. And that's the key, because people are oh, I'm so overwhelmed with posting content. And sure, in the beginning, it's just start with one platform, post. But if you can really get a content system involved with podcasting, especially being one of the big pillars that kind of has that domino effect. I mean, you combine that with some outbound strategy at the same time, especially when you talked about that ecosystem. I mean, that's a killer strategy.
It's huge. Podcasting
is of who you are, right? So before we're in there actually trying to sell them, and this, it's a lead behind it. They can go back and see it. It's not live. So you're building trust. You're building a connection. Somebody's not being sold. They're learning about your project or your product. It's just a really nice way to kind of tether everything together.
I think podcasting is probably the best anchor. It's probably the best core pillar piece. Yeah. People may have said a few years ago it was blog posts, long form ebooks or blog posts. I think podcasting is the best pillar piece
We do
that you could start with.
We do as well.
Yeah. I knew we were on the
truth.
same page with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like we both said in the questions, like when I asked you about the inbound versus outbound, or no, outsourcing the strategy, and you said you're biased, but it's like I'm biased, but I also believe this, and it comes across. So it's like I think that's important, the authentic vibe, which is it's difficult, especially in the beginning, to come across as like difficult to an extent, but like you really we were having a conversation with this is why it reminded me. We were having a conversation with somebody the other day, and it talked about they were selling, but they didn't like what the company was selling. They didn't believe in it. And that like truly comes across. You might not even recognize it, but when I talk to you and I'm asking you about the company, I can hear whether or not you're passionate, you believe what you're saying. You know, you can try your best to do it, but it's like a constant battle. But if you're like, I can sell when somebody gets really excited. Oh, I'm doing this and I love this. I love what I do. I love this every day. Like we do this, we're working with these companies. It's like, it's invigorating.
It is. And that's like, you're hitting on like a whole other conversation that reps should be interviewing the companies more than the other way around. Because yeah, if you're not selling forget about if you like it, the product or not, but if it doesn't have product market fit, and so many of these startups don't quite have that, and they're hiring reps, and these reps are like putting their all into it without fully knowing, like it's a big mistake. Yeah. So
Yeah, we had that same conversation the other day about that. So my final question in terms of like that, which led me into it, was like, what is your process for, say, hopping on a call with a potential client? How do you work through that process?
And just to clarify, work through like, how do I craft the sequences to get in front of them, or once they express some kind of interest, like how do I take it from there?
That second part. So like say somebody's interested in working with you and you're meeting with them to go over what you can do for their company. How do you then tell them and educate them about what you offer?
Yeah, I think the key is to just, I do my best to not sound like a salesperson at all. Almost like I was saying before, a domain expert. I come onto the call, audit what they're currently doing or not doing, and I'll just kind of naturally weave in ideas, things they might want to think about, almost like keeping myself removed from it. But like, hey, like they might have some sequences. Hey, like, can I read what you guys are doing? Ooh, you might want to tweak that copy. Ooh, it doesn't look like you're double verifying data. How are you increasing volume? Like, what are your reps doing? So I try to just be like a well of knowledge. And at this point, I will like spontaneously share my screen and show them campaigns. And I think as an agency, especially if you're like a marketing agency or outbound or anything like that, they want to see it. You don't want to bore them with visuals, but I'll share my screen, and if I know that this is like a health tech company that's targeting like hospitals and clinics and facilities, whatever, I'll share my screen and show them other clients of mine that are targeting those areas too, and results, reply rates, open rates, how many leads are we getting each month, to make it as real as possible. Because when you're in a red ocean versus like the blue ocean, where like you're a new product in a new space, for outbound and marketing, things like that, you've got to like show the results. You've got to have the social proof, and you got to show them that you're worth your salt. So in that first call, it's a lot of listening just to make sure like I'm aligned with them, like I can actually help them, give them a couple ideas that they can remember me by, and that can help them, and then show them results.
That's fantastic. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, because we're coming to the end of our hour, what's the best way for somebody to reach out for your services?
Yeah, check us out at modernoutbound.com. You could email me, Joel at Modern Outbound. You could DM me on LinkedIn, find me, follow me there. But would love to hear from some of your listeners.